Good morning to one all present here. Today I am going to talk about an approach to hemolytic anemia. My moderator is Dr. Krishnamurthy. Anemia is defined as a reduction in the total RBC mass or hemoglobin to adequately deliver oxygen to the peripheral tissues. It is not a disease but instead is a manifestation of the underlying pathology. According to WHO, hemoglobin less than 13 gram per deciliter in males and less than 12 gram per deciliter in females is defined as anemia. Anemia can be broadly classified based on the etiology as that due to blood loss, anemia due to decreased RBC production, or anemia due to increased destruction, that is hemolysis. Blood loss can either be external or internal. External in the form of an RTA or hemorrhoids, internal following a major surgery or following trauma. RBC production requires red cell precursors, erythropoietin, vitamin B12, and folic acid as the precursors for RBC production. Decrease in the red cell precursors due to toxins or infections, decrease in erythropoietin due to renal diseases, insufficient vitamin B12 folic acid required for maturation would lead to decrease in RBC production. Today, let us talk about hemolytic anemia. Hemolytic anemia is a disorder in which the red blood cells are destroyed faster than they are made. Hemolysis involves premature destruction and hence shortened lifespan of the RBCs. Anemia only results when the blood marrow production can no longer compensate for the shortened RBC survival. This is called as uncompensated hemolytic anemia. If the marrow can compensate, then the condition is called as compensated hemolytic anemia. The normal adult marrow, after full expansion, is able to produce the red cells at 6 to 8 times the normal rate. And the average lifespan of the RBCs is about 120 days. And however, in hemolytic anemia, many times it is not manifested until the red cell lifespan becomes less than 30 days. In brief about the life cycle of the RBCs, erythropoiesis normally occurs in the bone marrow. The stem cells get differentiated to a proerythroblast, early erythroblast, late erythroblast, and normoblast. These require the presence of erythropoietin. The normoblast then differentiates into reticulocyte in the presence of vitamin B12, folic acid. Reticulocyte is nothing but a nucleated RBC, and reticulocytes to develop into erythrocyte requires 24 to 48 hours. Maturation takes about 24 to 48 hours, which are then released into the peripheral blood. Erythrocytes circulate in the blood for approximately 120 days, following which they undergo senescence. Approach to hemolytic anemia. When a patient presents with features of anemia, we treat the patient based on the history, examination, investigation, and finally the diagnosis. To diagnose the patient with hemolytic anemia, we need to broadly classify hemolytic anemia to immune etiology and non-immune etiology. Non-immune etiology can either be congenital or acquired causes. So based on the history, these patients come with vague symptoms of anemia like fatigue, shortness of breath, generalized weakness, and lethargy. Patients also complain of palpitation and decreased exercise tolerance. Decreased exercise tolerance is normally seen when the hemoglobin is less than 7 gram per deciliter. Patient can also complain of jaundice, abdominal pain, or dark colored urine. Jaundice is a feature of hemolysis. Abdominal pain, especially the right upper quadrant pain, could indicate presence of gallstones. Dark colored urine signifies intravascular hemolysis. History of blood loss should always be ruled out. And the signs and symptoms of anemia will depend upon how rapidly it appears, its severity, and the age of the patient. So, duration of symptom presentation will indicate the chronicity of the disease. It is also important for us to note the past history of the patient with respect to diabetes or thyroid illness, which could signify autoimmune etiology. Presence of renal diseases, either in the patient or in the family. In the patient, it would be CKD or adult polycystic kidney disease, which would signify a decrease in erythropoietin. Presence of chronic diseases like tuberculosis or malignancy, especially GI malignancy, which could lead to anemia of chronic disease or anemia also due to blood loss. And repeated blood transfusion history must also be taken, which would indicate some membrane pathology or inherited disorders of the RBC. Surgical and family history of presence of gallstones, cholecystectomy or splenectomy, presence of or history of heart surgeries and prosthetic valve placement is also important. Drug history with allergy to penicillin or use of dopa, quinidine, use of ATT drugs like rifampicin is also important because they can cause drug-induced hemolytic anemia. General physical examination. Patients with anemia present with pallor and jaundice. Jaundice is specific for hemolytic anemia. Patients might also have rashes, peripheral cyanosis, and ulcers. These are features of peripheral vascular insufficiency, especially in certain disorders like sickle cell anemia, which will block the peripheral vessels, causing peripheral cyanosis and ulcers. Rashes can be a feature of non-autoimmune hemolytic anemia like TTP, HUS, etc. Coming to systemic examination, the per abdomen examination, the CVS examination are important. In per abdomen, we'll have to find out for hepatomegaly and splenomegaly, right upper quadrant tenderness to look for gallstones. Systemic examination in cardiovascular systemic examination would indicate presence of a pulmonary systolic murmur, usually less than grade 3, or presence of murmurs with a metallic click indicating prosthetic heart valves. Coming to the investigation, if we have patients whose signs and symptoms are suggestive of anemia, hemolytic anemia, that is darkened urine, jaundice, spleen or liver enlargement, and to investigate, we have to broadly classify the patient to have either intravascular hemolysis or extravascular hemolysis. Based on for the investigation, the most commonest investigation done is the complete blood count. The complete blood count will involve hemoglobin. Hemoglobin less than 13 in males and 12 in females is used to establish the diagnosis of anemia. Total counts, differential count, and the platelet counts are also studied, which can either be normal or decreased. These counts are decreased in hypersplenism. Reticulocyte count is an important parameter of hemolysis. Increase in reticulocyte count indicates accelerated production in the bone marrow. These reticulocyte counts are nothing but the nucleated RBCs. These are precursors of RBCs. It is an index of hematopoietic activity and is normally increased in hemolysis, also increased in blood loss, and will be decreased in bone marrow failure. The response, that is reticulocytosis, takes about 3 to 5 days for it to occur in the blood picture with adequate supplementation. Reticulocyte percentage is the percentage of all the RBCs that are reticulocytes. Normally, it is about 1 to 2%. However, it can be increased up to 4 to 5% in case of hemolysis. Absence of reticulocytosis does not eliminate hemolysis. Because this reticulocyte percentage is associated can be varied with the presence of anemia, we can use absolute reticulocyte count, where a value is obtained which is regardless of the degree of anemia. Normally, the absolute reticulocyte count ranges between 25,000 to 75,000 cells per microliter, and the red cell indices are MCV, MCH, MCHC, and the red cell distribution width are also important to establish the cause of anemia. The next investigation is blood smear. Blood smear will show anisopoikilocytosis and reticulocytosis. In the blood smear, if the patient shows presence of cystiocytes are nothing but fragmented RBCs or crenulated RBCs. With a history of trauma, we must consider conditions like March hemoglobinuria or AV malformations, history of a recent bypass, or if the patient was put on ECMO, presence of mechanical valves in the body. If, on the other hand, with the presence of rashes in the body, or history of travel, recent infection, it could indicate presence of microangiopathic hemolytic anemia or rickettsia immunodeficiency and other infections. Presence of sickle cells in the smear will indicate sickle cell anemia. Presence of elliptocyte or spirocytes would normally indicate hereditary spirocytosis or other membranopathies. However, if there are spirocytes are present, it is we have to do a direct antiglobin test, which is nothing but direct Coombs test, to differentiate between an autoimmune cause and a non-autoimmune cause. The other investigation would be the direct antibody test or the Coombs test. In hemolytic anemia, direct Coombs test is done, where we detect the presence of IgG, that is antibody or the complement fractions that are bound to the patient's RBCs. The patient's RBCs are taken, washed, and incubated with anti-human globulin. If there is a agglutination seen, that would indicate a positive reaction. This would indicate immune hemolytic etiology. Immune hemolytic anemia can either be autoimmune, alloimmune, or through drugs. Other investigations that are done will be LFT. LFT shows increased bilirubin and conjugated more than conjugated. Bilirubin is a very good marker for extravascular hemolysis. Hyperbilirubinemia, however, normally does not exceed more than 4 milligram per deciliter, and it can also be used as an early marker for therapy, where the hemoglobin returns back to normal or within 10% of the normal limit within 4 hours after the cessation of hemolysis. Next investigation is LDH. Increase in LDH is specific for hemolysis. There are 5 isoenzymes for LDH, of which 1 and 2 are commonly measured. It is used to differentiate between intravascular and extravascular hemolysis. It is only slightly increased in the extravascular hemolysis, for example, the warm autoimmune hemolytic anemia and other congenital forms, and increased by 4 to 5 times the upper normal limit in case of intravascular hemolysis. Next is haptoglobin. Haptoglobin binds to the free hemoglobin that is present in the blood vessel. So therefore, a decrease in haptoglobin will suggest hemolysis, especially intravascular hemolysis. Levels less than 25 milligram per deciliter is very sensitive and specific for intravascular hemolysis. However, because it is a positive acute phase reactant, many times during infections associated with hemolytic anemia, haptoglobins may not be decreased. But presence of increase in serum LDH and reduced haptoglobin is more than 90% sensitive for hemolysis. Other specific tests for hemolytic anemia would be presence of urine-free hemoglobin or urine hemosiderin. Urine hemosiderin would suggest severe intravascular hemolysis. Sickle cell screen, G6PD screen panel, and osmotic fragility test are other investigations. HB electrophoresis quantification test, DNA analysis, and flow cytometry, especially for CD55 and CD59, can be done for PNH. Now, if the patient presents with above complaints of anemia, and we are sure that it is a hemolytic anemia, but we are not sure of the cause, we should always proceed by doing the direct Coombs test. If the direct Coombs test is positive, it would suggest immune etiology. If it is negative, it would suggest a non-immune etiology. Immune-mediated hemolytic anemia can either be autoimmune, can be alloimmune, or it can be drug-induced. Non-immune causes can be either congenital hemolytic anemia or it can be inherited causes. Inherited causes like TTP, HUS, and other microangiopathies. In brief about some of the hereditary or inherited disorders, first is the membranopathies. The hereditary spherocytosis, it is caused by the defects in the protein involved in the supporting membrane, the skeleton, and the lipid bilayer. Commonly involved proteins are the ankyrin, spectrin, and BAN3, transmitted through autosomal dominant inheritance. The onset of hereditary spherocytosis can occur anytime between infancy to old age. Patients present with fluctuating jaundice, typically marked if these patients are associated with Gilbert syndrome, splenomegaly, and pigmented gallstones. Investigations include classical osmotic fragility test. However, this is obsolete, and we now use the flow analysis of eosin maleimide bound to red cells. These normally bind to the ankyrin and BAN3, absence of which they will not bind to the RBCs. Treatment will include splenectomy associated along with cholecystectomy. However, splenectomy is not done until it is clinically indicated. Clinical indication would be symptomatic anemia, presence of leg ulcers or growth retardation. This is due to a risk of post-splenectomy sepsis. Hereditary elliptocytosis. These are clinically milder diseases to hereditary spherocytosis. This is normally for failure of spectrum heterodimers to get converted to heterotetramers. Next important disease is PNH, that is paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria. It is an acquired disease. PNH is due to a defect in the PIGA gene, which is phosphatidylinositol-glycan gene, which produces the GPI-linked membrane proteins like the DK activating factor, which is CD55, CD59, the C8 binding proteins in all of the hematopoietic stem cells. These will regulate the complement activation in the body, absence of which will lead to uncontrolled activation of complements and result in the destruction of the RBCs and precursors, causing cell destruction. So these patients present with classical triad of hemoglobinuria, Budd-Chiari syndrome, and aplastic anemia, suggestive of intravascular hemolysis, unexplained thrombosis, and bone marrow failure. This is a classical triad of PNH. Whom do we suspect PNH with? If patients present with Coombs negative hemolytic anemia with unexplained thrombosis and aplastic anemia, they should be screened for PNH. And diagnosis is done through flow cytometry, including FLAIR. What is FLAIR? FLAIR is a fluorescent aerolysin. Aerolysin is a bacterial toxin that normally binds to GPA anchor. Now, in these RBCs, they do not have a GPA anchor. Hence, this FLAIR binds to the granulocytes instead of the RBCs. So this is seen in flow cytometry, and it is it's a diagnostic feature of PNH. Treatment would be through eculizumab, which is an anti-complement therapy. Moving to enzymopathies, the most common enzymopathy is glucose-6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency. It is required to produce NADPH, which is an antioxidant, inherited through X-linked inheritance, and the carrier females are resistant to falciparum malaria. These patients are usually asymptomatic, and they undergo intravascular hemolysis when they're in response to an oxidant stress like uh, food like fava beans or infections, drugs like antimalarials, sulfonamides, aspirin, etc. It is a self-limiting disease because the new red cells that are produced after senescence are made with near normal enzymes. D6PD deficiency is associated clinically with three major syndromes. One is acute hemolytic anemia due to oxidant stress, which I spoke about, then neonatal jaundice, and congenital non-spherocytic hemolytic anemia. Diagnosis can be made by the presence of a high degree of suspicion, the race and the ethnicity, presence of bite cells and Heinz bodies on the smear, and enzyme level estimation. Treatment is basically to stop the offending agent, exchange transfusion in the neonates. Other common enzymopathies are pyruvate kinase deficiency and glutathione deficiency. Coming to thalassemias. Thalassemias are a heterogeneous group of disorders due to reduced rate of synthesis of either the alpha or the beta genes, which would lead to respective thalassemias, such as alpha or beta thalassemia, and this is the most common gene disorder that is known to mankind. Transmission is through autosomal recessive transmission. It is and commonly we see the beta thalassemia. It is the relative excess of the other unpaired globin chains. Here it is the alpha chains which accumulate and they produce damage to the membrane of the RBCs, which would lead to hemolysis. Based on that, the clinically they could be differentiated as thalassemia major, thalassemia intermedia, or beta thalassemia trait based on the amount of beta globin chains that are present. We commonly come across the thalassemia intermedia or the thalassemia beta trait. They're diagnosed they're diagnosed when their blood picture denotes hypochromic microcytic anemia, need for recurrent blood transfusions, presence of target cells, and reticulocytosis. The investigation of choice is high performance liquid chromatography. Treatment would be regular blood transfusions, need for iron chelation, splenectomy. Permanent cure would be stem cell transplantation. Coming to the sickle cell anemia, here there is inheritance of the sickle beta globin chain, wherein in the sixth position, valine substitutes glutamic acid. The deoxygenated sickle hemoglobin undergoes polymerization to form insoluble forms, causing the sickling disease. This will block the vessels to various organs, causing infarcts and clinical features like vaso-occlusive crisis, visceral requisition crisis, aplastic crisis, hemolytic crisis. Diagnosis is made mainly by the presence of sickle cells in the blood picture. These are the sickle cells that you see here. So these will occlude the vessels leading to various organs and cause the clinical manifestations as listed here. So these patients will also have a shrunken or a constricted spleen. They may also undergo autosplenectomy, presence of oval jolly bodies. They can be diagnosed through high performance liquid chromatography. Treatment is through hydroxyurea, which will increase the HbF levels in the body. Other symptomatic treatment would include rehydration and antibiotic if infection is identified, blood transfusion, and oxygenation. Coming to the acquired disorders can either be immune or non-immune. Immune hemolytic anemias are commonly autoimmune hemolytic anemias. Here, the antibodies are produced against the body's own red blood cells. These patients are positive to direct Coombs test, and they can either be classified as warm or cold types based on the temperature of the area. A reaction at 37 degrees Celsius would be warm, and reaction at 4 degrees Celsius would be cold type. The warm autoimmune hemolytic anemia, here the RBCs are coated with IgG alone or with a complement, and these are normally destroyed in the reticuloendothelial cells into extravascular hemolysis. Examples would be SLE, CLL, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and babesiosis. They present with episodic hemolysis and splenomegaly. Treatment would include immunosuppression, corticosteroids, and splenomegaly. Splenectomy, sorry. Then cold type. Here the autoantibodies are monoclonal and or polyclonal. Monoclonal in case of lymphoproliferative diseases and polyclonal in case of infections. The IgM antibodies are found here instead of the IgG antibodies, and it does not have associated complement. And these would normally lead to intravascular hemolysis. Clinical features would be aggravated by cold, would lead to intravascular hemolysis, presence of mild jaundice and splenomegaly. Common causes would be infections like mycoplasma, Epstein-Barr virus, or lymphoproliferative disorders like Waldenström macroglobulinemia. Treatment would be to treat the infection, keep the patient warm, splenectomy, and use of anti-CD20, that is rituximab. Immune-mediated hemolysis can also be alloimmune, for example, the ABO incompatibility, more common in the RH incompatibility, leading to intravascular hemolysis, or drug-induced hemolytic anemias, like use of penicillin, cephalosporins, methyl-dopa, L-dopa, quinidine, etc. Coming to the non-immune hemolytic anemias can either be macroangiopathic or microangiopathic. Macroangiopathic hemolytic anemias, here there are abnormalities within the heart or the larger vessels with the presence of prostatic vessels or aortic stenosis. Mechanical injury is more common with aortic stenosis when compared to mitral stenosis. Also, if patients are put on ECMO or peripheral lines into machines for dialysis, etc., it can also cause macroangiopathic hemolytic anemia. Other causes would be march hemoglobinuria, where there is damage of red cells between the small bones of the feet due to shear stress and prolonged marching or running. Diagnosis is made based on history, peripheral smear, and suspicion. Microangiopathic hemolytic anemia can be thrombotic or non-thrombotic. Thrombotic causes can be TTP, HUS, DIC, sepsis, etc. Non-thrombotic would be malignant hypertension, systemic vasculitis, and disseminated malignancy. If we suspect a thrombotic microangiopathy, patients will have thrombocytopenia, features of hemolytic anemia like increase in LDH, histiocytes, or decrease in haptoglobin, and other organ system involvement like kidney failure and cardiovascular system neurological findings. Those common causes here are TTP and HUS. TTP and HUS present similar features. However, TTP presents with a pentad of the above features, which is hemolytic anemia, which is hemolytic anemia, in addition with fever and neurological complications. And here they usually have ADAMTS13 deficiency. ADAMTS is the protease that cleaves the large von Willebrand factor multimers in the vasculature. Deficiency would lead to presence of platelet microthrombi. And so a test would be to find out the activity of this ADAMTS13, and activity less than 10% would signify the etiology of TTP. Treatment would be plasma exchange and corticosteroids and rituximab. Hemolytic uremic syndrome. Hemolytic uremic syndrome can be caused by Shiga toxin or a deficiency of regulator proteins that could restrict the complement activation. This would lead to the damage of the endothelium and the kidney cells. Other causes would be the streptococcal pneumonia infection, then vitamin B12 deficiency, etc. So tests would be to look for Shiga toxin in the stools, look for homocysteine, methionine levels, and vitamin B12 levels. Treatment would be supportive care, use of eculizumab, which is an anti-complement drug, and vitamin B12 supplementation. It is seen that a ratio of LDH by AST more than 22 has shown to differentiate TTP from other thrombotic microangiopathies like HUS and HELLP syndrome. Other microangiopathic hemolytic anemias are scleroderma kidney crisis, APLA syndrome, malignant hypertension, and infections. So to diagnose these conditions, we have to take a detailed history and specific testing based on that. For example, the APLA antibodies, etc. Treatment would be supportive care and remove the inciting agent when possible. Treat the specific cause. Take-home message: hemolysis should be considered if the patient has experienced a rapid fall in hemoglobin concentration, reticulocytosis, or abnormally shaped RBCs on the peripheral smear in the absence of blood loss. Blood smear examination is still fundamental, and direct Coombs test is a cornerstone for diagnostic workup. Hemolytic markers like hemoglobin, reticulocyte, histiocyte, LDH, they are undoubtedly important in monitoring the efficacy of treatment. These are my references. Thank you.